Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. My name is Leon Jones, and this evening I'm going to talk about the political polls. Now, it's very important that you understand what's going on with these polls. So, I'm just going to title this video Types of Polls Used for Political Elections. Because right now, we are going through the political season here in 2024. Now, be advised that we have an event called the DNC going on in Chicago, the Democratic National Convention. Now, I've watched that show, and it is a shit show. Excuse my language. It's phony. I mean, I've seen Kamala Harris go to Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, and before she arrived, Trump supporters were basically thrown out of a restaurant because she was coming. The Trump supporters, they also protested. It's almost like Nazi Germany. You're getting people out of the way that you don't like. Meanwhile, Kamala, she doesn't do interviews. And shout out to JD Vance, who's going on the Bill O'Reilly show. Bill O'Reilly is the truth. I used to watch him when he was on Fox News, no spin, and that's the way I do it here. I'm just going to give you some objectivity without the bias, even though I know who I support during this election. And all information that I'm going to use, I'm going to put it at the bottom of my description of my video. You can read it and you utilize your own mind based on what I've said and how you see it from your own mind. Now, looking at this convention, I see a lot of baby boomers, old Gen Xers, a lot of old presidents, a lot of old reverends like Reverend Jesse Jackson. Now, I only saw the first couple days. Now, tonight, Tim Napoleon Waltz is supposed to be speaking, and tomorrow, Kamala Harris is going to be speaking. Now, the reason why these polls are significant is because after the convention ends tomorrow, Kamala Harris is going to get a slight bump in the polls. Now, understand this about the polls. Most of your polls, and I want you to hear me and hear me clearly. You have Politico, that's where most of the polls are found. The most accurate poll that I have looked at and I would go by, if I had to review any poll, would be Rasmussen or Rasmussen. Why? Because they poll every day. You see, when it comes to these polls, I mean, you see Fox News, ABC, MSNBC, NBC, CBS. Well, see, all these polls have a bias. And the reason why there is a bias is because when we sample 1,000 people, and that is a small sample, how can that represent 180 million people who are going to vote. Now, also, speaking of voting, I can register 100% of the, and this is exaggerated now, of the population to vote. But you don't look at registered voters, you look at likely voters. That's what people don't understand. Because you can be registered all you want. Because I'm just going to tell you this. There will be some people who don't like either candidate. So they're going to vote for a third party candidate. Some people aren't going to vote at all. Now, when you look at the polls also, you have to look at it this way. It's called variables. And the variables are how many people are running. That's your X value if we were doing an algebraic equation. Well, most of the polls that are being used now, they're based on two people running, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. But remember, we don't have two people running, we have five people running. Now, we have Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Cornel West, Jill Stein of the Socialist Party, and Robert F. Kennedy. Five people. So when you look at the polls, you have to include everybody. Now, Robert F. Kennedy, Jill Stein, and Cornel West are going to take some votes away from Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Because it's not going to be apparent that the candidates outside the Republican and the Democrat are going to get no votes. They are going to get some votes. Now, to be included in the debate, just like Ross Perot was back in 1992, in fact, with Ross Perot on the ballot, because he got 15%, Ross Perot took a number of votes away from George Bush, while Clinton won. Now, that's not going to happen during this election. It's not going to happen. But polling is about data. And this is why I always tell individuals, you can spit numbers out all you want. Do you understand the numbers? Can you look at the data and tell me if there's a bias or a fault with it? And the biggest thing when you talk about the polls is, how do they come up with the numbers? What methodology did they use? Who was sampled? And what was used to get a sample? Was it a phone call? Was it a person filling out something that they had to submit through the internet? Was it something that had to be mailed? Those are the questions that have to be asked. Also, how often is the poll taken? Now, I know your Fox News polls and your CBS News polls, your MSNBC, even I believe PBS, Reuters might have a poll out there. They weren't taken every week. Now, I will caution you and go to politico.com. Politico.com. Number of these polls that they're using to make it look like Kamala is leading, they're not true polls. Why? Because those polls that are used are 2 and 3 weeks old. You have to remember your date. And this is why I tell people here on the internet, before you quote any statistic out, See how old that statistic is. Look at the trends and see when you poll every day, you get an idea of the trends because events happen. But most of us will look at a poll that's put on television because the media, whether it's regular TV media or cable media, they're in a tank for Kamala Harris. We already know it. They want her to win. And they're trying to do everything to suppress the polls to keep the other side from going to vote. That's the answer. Because you have a person who's running. She said in a presidential primary that Joe Biden was racist. She was the one that came up with the little girl being bused. Well, Tulsi Gabbard, who they have on terrorism watch, mopped the floor up with her. And that ended her career. She couldn't get out of Iowa. Nobody voted for her. Now, if you see what's going on now, you look at the Democratic National Convention. They looked at Joe Biden like he was a messiah. And he told nothing but lies. He said, well, we kept inflation down, we secured the borders. No, he didn't. In fact, inflation was up right around 9.4%. And when Donald Trump was in office, it was 1.4%. Gas was $1.87 to $2 a gallon. When Trump was in office, Joe Biden, we're still over the $3 mark, and we've gone up to $4, and in some areas, $5. The cost of breads, the cost of food. I notice now when I go in grocery stores, a lot of items aren't there. Now, when Trump was in office, like Trump or not, the economy was much better under Trump. We didn't have wars going on. Now we got money going out to Ukraine. Now, I will say this about Obama. Obama did deport a lot of migrants. He did. And Trump followed Obama. So I have to give Obama the credit. Trump continued to follow it. Now, Trump got a wall, 500 miles of wall built. So he also tried to remedy the amount of individuals entering this country. Now, with Kamala Harris, and I don't understand what people are really looking at except the RAG formula. RAG stands for race, abortion, or we'll call it something else. But you know what the A stands for: deletion and gender. That's what they're looking at. Because looking at the Democratic National Convention right now in Chicago, it's all smoke and mirrors. I have not heard anything about policy. I heard what they want to do, but remember, it's if you're going to do something like Harris, she took something from Trump, well, we're going to not tax tips. Well, she's still vice president. She can still do it now. Secure the border. Kamala Harris can have it done now. She is still the vice president. Tim Napoleon Walz, what happened in Minnesota on his watch as governor? He can continue to fix Minnesota up. And he can go back in front of a microphone and say, I should have been a better governor. I allowed this to happen. And I take full responsibility. But they're not. But you see a lot of these Democrats, they're clapping their hands. They're jumping around because the speakers come up and they say something they want to hear. See, these are uninformed voters. Now, Obama in his speech said, well, we want to keep people educated. No, you don't want to keep people educated. You want to keep them dumb so they believe everything you said. And this is how dictators get into power. You got to dumb down your citizens. You don't want them educated. You're talking about health insurance. Now, I will say this, I'm not in favor of Obamacare, but until there's something better out there, and even Trump said this, got to keep Obamacare intact. Now, I will say this too about Obama. He from his standpoint, you don't have to agree with it, but he went in there and tweaked healthcare. He did do something. You can talk a bunch of stuff about Trump. Trump did lower taxes. He did. Economy was much better under Trump. Now, Biden says, excuse me, not Biden, Joe Biden. Joe Biden says they created 16 million jobs. No, they didn't. See, what happened was, and this is where you have to, and I'm going to do a video on the unemployment numbers as well. Those numbers are also fraudulent because the jobs that were created, I believe they were all in hospitality. You had a lot of government jobs that were created, not a lot of private sector jobs. See, the jobs that he is referring to are the ones that people left and they never came back. So they're utilizing those numbers and adding them to what is created. That is false. And this is where numbers can be deceiving. And again, Joe Biden, during that speech, he was talking about what he did. Well, if you think about it, if he did such a good job, he should be in a race. He would be the incumbent and he should be running for a second term, not Kamala Harris. Now, again, Kamala is trying to distance herself from Joe Biden. It's not going to happen. Why? Because she's on his watch. She's his vice president. She's president of the Senate. She's the one that broke the tie for the Inflation Act, where she wanted 87,000 more IRS agents. And if you had transactions of $600 more in your bank account, they wanted to investigate that. They want to tax tips. They want to tax Cash App, Venmo. They wanted to tax Zelle. They wanted more taxes because what they believe is the government getting more revenue. Well, here's the bottom line. Government is not in business to make money. They're in business to protect our rights. But you do need some government services. Now, the government does provide jobs. There's nothing wrong with having a government job. I have one. But the bottom line is, I know I'm going off tangent. I'll get back on the polls in a minute. When you go out to vote, you can't vote based on how you feel. You can't vote based on gender or race. You can't vote on symbolism. And this is why Black people were having a hard time. During that Democratic National Convention, I saw a lot of old Black people. And it made me step in time as if I was in Selma, marching in civil rights. But that's all these people know. And when it comes to a number of the older Blacks here, they're where they are because they never created anything. Yes, they did march for civil rights, but it was appropriate then. But it's not appropriate now. Now, I'm not saying that there's no racism out here. I would be a fool to say that. There is. But doors have opened. You have to take advantage of them. Now, the problem with a number of blacks is we have a lot of prejudice within our own race. Look at the complexion, dark skin, light skin. You look at some of the Divine Nine, they would only take certain people like the AKAs. They used to take individuals who were light skinned, the Deltas who were brown skinned. And I'm just going to say this, a number of your undesirable women went over to the Zeta Phi Betas. It's true. And your brainiacs, they went over to the Alphas. And your pretty boys went to the Kappas. And your doggish guys went over to the Cubes. I'm just giving you an example. But the bottom line is, these are people who are going to vote Democrat. These are your boulets, like your Beta Phi Pi that was founded in 1904. If you go back to my video I did last week on the Divine Nine, I give you all the history. But the problem with all these individuals, Michael Eric Dyson, Mark Lamont Hill, Stephen A. Smith, D.L. Hewley, Steve Harvey, Boyce Watkins, a number of them were part of the Divine Nine. And because they were part of the Divine Nine, they think they're smarter than everybody else. And they want to dictate to us who we should vote for. And if we don't vote for the person that they want us to vote for, then we're criticized. We're called coons or Uncle Toms, when in essence, they're the ones who are Uncle Toms. And they have to understand that Black people just don't think alike. We're not a monolithic people, bottom line. And what they don't understand is prior to the 60s, most Black people voted Republican anyway, because the Democrats were the ones who founded the Ku Klux Klan. Basis of the Ku Klux Klan was to keep the Republicans out of power. Why? Because you had a lot of Black people who were Republicans who were in office, and they didn't want that. In fact, the Ku Klux Klan sabotaged a Republican convention in the 19th century. People don't know that because we're not taught that in history. Although we hear a lot about Martin Luther King and the Black Panthers, we hear about Marcus Garvey. A number of your Black movements were involved in communism. Martin Luther King had the Poor People's Campaign, which Black Lives Matter took some information from the Poor People's Campaign. I did a video on that long ago. The Poor People's Campaign was started by Martin Luther King. It didn't go too much further because he was assassinated in 1968. But if you look at BLM, and this is what you got to look for when you're voting. What is this person talking about? Just because they can give you flowery speeches and they can entice you, when all of that honeymoon wears off and you're in the real world, because this is what Oprah did for a number of women who watched the show. They made them feel good for an hour, and then after the show was over, they go back into reality for 24 more hours until Oprah came on the next day. So when you are educated / informed, you're not going to vote just on what you hear. You're going to vote based on a person's record. Now, again, during this election, you have to vote not just for the president and vice president. Some of you are going to be voting for governors, mayors. You have to look on the local level as well. Ballot initiatives. Many people don't understand what ballot initiatives are. In fact, local politics is very important because they're the most responsible because they're right there. They have a budget. But I'm just giving you an example on how these polls are made. And these polls are made based off of a sample. So when they come up with these polls, again, they use a certain methodology. And the methodology that they use could be out of 1,000, because they love using 1,000, but they don't use 1,000 where they split everything up 500, 500. Out of that 1,000, they might look at how many men, how many women, how many Black, how many are Caucasian, how many Hispanic. And this is where your polls can get quite flaky. And this is where they can be oversampled, like could be an issue out there. That one issue could be a woman's issue, or they're going to poll more women. And when they do that, of course, it makes sense. Women are going to vote for a woman's issue. But when that poll comes out and they polled more women, we don't know what the issue is in that poll. We just know that there was a poll taken. And that's the thing. You have to dig deep. And you have to, again, look at when they took the poll. Start looking at political.com. Find out how old the polls are, because polls are based on data. And a lot of the data is faulty. The data is used to be deceptive. I mean, you have a lot of ads going out there. You have the conventions going out there. Polls are influenced every day. But the consistency is taking an accurate poll every day. Now, even Rasmussen, he's probably using 1,000 as well, but he's taking it every day. And see, when you take the poll every day, you can see a trend. You can see if your polls are going, for one candidate, it's going up, it's going down. Now, there's going to be a bump for Kamala Harris in the polls. It always happens after a convention. Moreover, Trump, he may have had a bad week. Polls could go down. Now, let's go ahead and share some screens here and look at types of polls, exploring polling methods and their significance. Okay, now, have you ever wondered what's behind those graphs and charts that you see on the news? Often they are the result of polls, which their tools used to collect public opinions. Notice what I said. These are tools used to collect public opinions on everything, ranging from politics to product preferences. Now, understand this, and shout out to Barry Cunningham. I listened to him. One thing that he forgot the different types of polls that are used. So I'm going to give you the different types of polls, because remember something, there are different types of polls out there, and they're used to gather various kinds of data. Now, during this presentation, I'm going to explore the major types, their purposes, and how they work. And there are going to be some examples provided to you so you can understand how the polls work. You get your mind going, and then when you see the polls on television, you're going to know whether they're faulty. Now, again, what is a poll? Well, a poll is a method or a study that collects the opinions or preferences of a specific set of people on a precise topic. Just as I mentioned before, I use a woman's issue, like say deleting babies. Well, as a man, I'm not going to vote for that issue. That is not my issue. Well, that's a topic. Now, when it comes to polls, they act as a conduit for gathering insights from diverse respondents. Now, they come in different forms, from the traditional paper-based surveys to modern online platforms. Now, the poll results are then analyzed to identify trends and patterns within a target population. Now, this is where polls can get tricky. Target population. It didn't say population. So they're targeting something within that population. So the polls could be targeting women between 30 and 65, or men 18 to 29, or it could be a TV poll, who watches Fox News. That's where the polls start to come in. Now, the polls can be effective because they can give you an idea of how your product is doing. Now, when it comes with polls, they have their beauties, but they have lies. Now, they are effective and some are simple and some are complex. Well, what you get from them is a snapshot of public sentiments, whether you're assessing consumer preferences or tracking political trends and even measuring employee satisfaction. You need them as they help you make decisions and strategize. So, what's a poll? Poll is a handy way to hear from many people so you can make smarter choices on what they say. Now, here's what I'm going to say. How do they work? As I told you before, it's very, very simple. Polls are a representative sample. Now, once the sample is chosen, participants are asked questions about the topic of interest. Then the data is collected from the responses and analyzed to identify trends and patterns. Now comes the topic of interest that you all want to see, because this is where you start to get into the polls from a deeper standpoint, because they are different types of polls. And as you understand, data is king. So there's no doubt about that. But sometimes numbers do not make up the critical data. Instead, it is what people think. It's almost what we call an opinion poll. Now, again, polls are a fantastic way to tap into thoughts and get a pulse of what the public cares about. But again, with so many types out there, choosing the right one that is going to be meaningful to you will be tricky. Now, I'm going to walk through during this presentation the most common types of polls, how they work, and how to use them to get the information that you want. Now, the problem with polls is polls can be skewed, and a lot of these polls are skewed, or there may be weeks that a poll isn't taken. So when that poll isn't taken and they're using old data, that's also skewing data as well, because they're not really representing what's going on today, but they may use old polls to represent what's going on today. The problem is you don't have any data for today. You're using yesterday's data. It should be discarded. Now, here are 7 types of polls. Now, basically, when we deal with politics, we use tracking polls or opinion polls. And basically, an opinion poll is understanding what people think. Then you have a benchmark poll that's setting a standard for comparison, which a benchmark poll could be used for a product. And you have a straw poll, which is also some of these polls that are used in politics could be for popular opinion. And it's basically a quick check on popular opinion. Then, this is what Rasmussen uses. He uses a tracking poll. Why? Because the tracking poll keeps tabs on changing views. And this is when you start seeing trends. A tracking poll is very accurate. If a poll is just stationary or it's skewed, you're going to know it if you can find out what the methodology is. And sometimes you don't even need to find out what the methodology is. Just need the actual dates, like I just mentioned. Then you have a bushfire poll that's capturing immediate public sentiment. Again, a bushfire poll is capturing immediate public sentiment. Then you have your entrance poll, peek into voter sentiment before casting ballots. Then you have your exit poll. Now, your exit poll, you always hear that when it's time to vote. That's when you get voter insights into the behavior of the voter. And basically, I call the exit poll the real poll. That's the final poll because you have the real sample, and real sample comes from what? Likely voters. Now, the most common one is the opinion poll. The opinion poll is like a mind reading machine. It helps you understand the thoughts and feelings of a specific group of people. The poll involves asking the same questions to individuals. It is done to get collective information on a topic or issue. Now, with this opinion poll, the aim is to provide insights into public sentiments and preferences. So, what is its purpose? Versus representation. So, the goal is to represent the target audience accurately and decision making to help make informed decisions, predict election outcomes, and measure public support for policies or candidates. Now, how does it work? Well, just have an imagination on what you know about the people in your town who prefer tea or coffee. Well, you can't go and ask every single one, so you create a poll. First, you have to define your target audience, maybe adults in your town. Then you choose a representative sample, like 100 people from different age groups and neighborhoods. Finally, you ask your question, coffee or tea, and then you analyze the responses to see which beverage wins. Now, again, yes, it's a representation, but it's still a faulty poll because it's really not accurate. You're targeting somebody, a target audience. Now, people who use this poll, news organizations, use it to determine public opinion. Again, examples in action. News organizations, they use this poll to determine public opinion on current events and political candidates. Of course, marketing firms, they also use polls to understand consumer preferences and product satisfaction. Now, an online poll maker will help you collect this data quickly. For instance, you can try Survey Sparrow, which I've heard of that. Now, this platform that you create polls without the hassle of coding, plus the universal UI and the drag and drop feature make it easy to create polls. So again, you have different platforms. So you just heard for the opinion poll. Then there's the benchmark poll. It's conducted right before or shortly after a campaign is officially launched. Now, unlike opinion polls that take human sentiments as the metrics, benchmark polls are all about the internal insights. The results help an organization understand its stand in the market before it dives in. So, much like an ego boost, if you or your organization fall behind, you can take measures early on to improve. So, what is the purpose of a benchmark poll? Well, you have the identifier. So, in this example, the poll identifies voter demographics that are supportive, opposed, or persuadable. Then you have your guide strategies. The guide strategies basically highlight strengths, weaknesses, and effective messaging approaches to get a clear picture. So, how does this all work? Well, let's look at a sample of a political candidate considering a run for office. They will conduct a benchmark poll before launching a campaign. Now, the poll will ultimately target a select group of potential voters. I call them likely voters, asking questions like, are you familiar with candidate X? What issues are important to you? That's the methodology. Now, the results from this poll are like a starting point. It lets them know where you stand and what strategies must be implemented for a win. Examples. Talk about some examples other than political campaigns. You have product launches. Companies do polls to analyze the visibility of their brand because this helps them understand what the audiences need from their product and what message might interest them. Fundraising effects. When organizations raise money for a cause, these polls help define which people might donate and how much they care about the cause. Then you have this straw poll. Now, straw polls are informal or ad hoc votes to conduct or measure consensus or opinions within a group quickly. Straw polls, let me make a correction. Straw polls are informal or ad hoc votes conducted to measure consensus or opinions within a group quickly. It is often used in meetings to determine the prevailing sentiment. Basically, with this poll, there are no set rules or processes for a straw poll. Just like drawing a straw, an impromptu opinion vote is conducted. So remember, when you used to raise your hand when your teacher asked who wanted PE instead of math for the final hour, it's that simple. What's the purpose? Well, you test the waters. And testing the waters means you test public opinion on a new idea or proposal. Then you can also generate a discussion. These polls will also spark debates within a group. Why? Because it brings different perspectives and viewpoints to the table. It's almost like brainstorming. Now, how does it work? Well, movie polls on a house party are the best example to explain this, such as somebody might throw out a casual question, which is a straw poll. Now, the straw poll example is who wants to watch a comedy, followed by a show of hands or a quick yay or nay vote. This simple process gives a basic idea of which movie genre is most popular in your group. Examples in action. Let's look at a little scenario from straw polls. Well, as I discussed above, talked about the movie, social gatherings, online forums. Official elections are conducted to see which topics generate the most interest amongst community members. Then a tracking poll. Now, this is what Rasmussen uses because this kind of poll involves consistent monitoring. So there's not a simple snapshot here. A tracking poll surveys a fixed group of people repeatedly over a period of time. So the same group of people are asked the same questions over some time to track and observe changes. This is like conducting a longitudinal study on public opinions and sentiments. So basically, the intervals between the polls could be any time span, weekly, monthly, or even daily. This is what Rasmussen does. Because what's the purpose? Measuring opinion change. Researchers understand how public opinion evolves. It provides insights into changing attitudes, perceptions, and behaviors. Then, with this poll, you predict trends by tracking beliefs, opinions, and preferences over time. Get patterns and trends that help predict future outcomes. And this, in my humble opinion, is the most accurate poll if you have the right sample. Now, how does it work? Well, let's take a news organization tracking public opinion on the upcoming election. Now, they might conduct a monthly poll on the candidate preference by asking the same core questions. So, by analyzing the results over a period of time, they can see if a particular candidate is gaining momentum or if a specific issue is becoming more important to others. Let's give you some examples in action. Brand health tracking. Companies conduct the poll to track brand perception and health monitoring changes in brand awareness, favorability, and loyalty over time. There's also Consumer Sentiment Index, known as CSI. Now we deal more with the market research. What they do, they use these polls to measure consumer confidence and sentiment because they provide insights into consumer behavior and economic trends. Then we have the bushfire poll. If you want real-time opinions, this is the poll you're going to use because this ad hoc survey collects real-time public opinion on current issues, political campaigns, social movements, or even crisis management. It is conducted in the aftermath of an important event. Now, they are mainly useful when you need raw opinions from the affected population. Emergencies. Emergencies are predictable, and bushfire polls must be adaptable and flexible in their methodology. They may employ various data collection methods. An example, phone interviews, face-to-face interactions, online surveys, and that's going to depend on the circumstances because the purpose, you deal with public opinions. These polls check what people think about how their government handle things, evacuations, and how much community support that the community actually got. Then you get the identifying needs. These polls find out what people urgently need, like a place to stay, medical help, or essential services. So, how does it work? Well, right after a natural calamity like a hurricane or a flood or a tornado, have you seen news reporters arrive at the concerned location and ask people questions? This is to give the public an idea of the opinions of those affected firsthand by the disaster with the results. People can make up their minds about the issues. Examples, a post-earthquake survey, as mentioned above. A bushfire poll assesses public perceptions of building safety, emergency response effectiveness, and community resilience. Here's another example. Pandemic response evacuation. Now, during the global health crisis, health authorities, they basically conducted a poll to assess public compliance with preventative measures, perceptions of risk, and access to health care services. So, let's wrap this list up with two standard polls that you might be able to relate to. We're going to get into the entrance poll and the exit poll. First, it's the entrance poll. The entrance poll is this poll is conducted right before voters vote at polling station. It is taken at the entrance, hence the name. It aims to gather information on who the voter plans to vote for or similar questions related to electoral choices. These questions will be related to voter preferences and candidate choices. And that's electoral, like the electoral college, the electoral choices. Remember. Now, the purpose, we're going to forecast election results. It helps to get a snapshot of voter preferences. Again, let me make another correction. Not a snapshot, not a Snapchat. It's a snapshot. Again, let's go over the purpose again so you have it clear. Because we're all human. I'll make errors myself. So I want to make sure I get this information out without giving you misinformation. Again, this link will be posted under the description of my video so you'll know exactly where I got the information from. So, again, going back over the entrance poll, it aims to gather information on who the voter plans to vote for or similar questions related to electoral choices. These questions will be related to voter preferences and candidate choices. Now, the purpose. First purpose is to forecast election results. And what you get is a snapshot of voter preferences before the public votes. And then you also get a chance to understand voter behavior because it helps the candidates and analysts understand the electorate better. Example, presidential or local elections conducted to assess voter preferences for different candidates, key issues driving voter turnout and demographic shifts in voter patterns. And that's what you have seen over the last few years. Different demographics vote different ways. And you have the exit poll. Exit polls are crucial in terms of the electoral process. It provides insights into voter behavior right after they have cast their votes. They essentially serve as fraud detectors and help maintain the election's integrity. What's the purpose? Swing analysis. Well, with swing analysis, these polls help calculate swing and turnouts by analyzing voter preferences based on the data collected from different stations. Then we assess electoral trends. And this is where analysts can estimate changing patterns by comparing the current exit poll with the previous one in the same booth. Example in action. We utilize primary elections. So basically, you get data and insights into intra-party dynamics, candidate appeal among different demographics, and the overall mood of the electorate leading up to the general election. Again, polling methods and approaches. So let me walk through different approaches to conducting a poll. So you'll know how these polls are conducted. And this is where the methodology starts. This is the foundation for the methodology. You have online polls. These polls are done on the internet and are easy to share on social media or websites. They're great for getting quick feedback from a lot of people. Then the old-fashioned telephone polls. These polls are done over the phone. Even though they're not as popular as before, they are still used, especially in political surveys. Well, telephone polls were done when a lot of people had landlines. Now, they occasionally they have your cell phone, they'll call you as well. I've never been polled. Then I don't see these too much either. Mail-in polls. And what happens with mail-in polls, people basically get questionnaires in the mail, they fill them out and send them back. The problem with mail-in polls, they're slower than online polls, but they give us another way to collect information. Then there is the Delphi method. And the Delphi method is when experts give their opinions anonymously through several rounds of discussions until they reach an agreement. Now, here are the different question types that can be included. So basically, I'm giving you how the methodology is formed and what's in the methodology. So the different question types, you have what we call the Likert scale polls. These polls use a scale from strongly agree to disagree to measure how strongly people feel about something. This is where you can get oversampled too. Then you get multiple choice polls. People choose from a list of options. These polls are easy to understand and analyze, making them popular for market research. Then you get ranked choice polls, where voters rank their choices instead of picking one. They help us understand preferences better, especially when there are many options. Now, again, you have Likert squared questions, multiple choice questions, rating scale questions. And when it comes to polls, how do you conduct a poll? You got a defined purpose. And your defined purpose is clearly state what you want to know. You choose a method. Pick the best way to reach your audience. You craft questions. Make sure questions are clear and unbiased. You reach your audience, and you do that by a survey through mail, social media, or other means. Then you analyze the results. You look at the answers and see what they mean for your goal. And this is where polls can get skewed based on how they're conducted as well, because this is a form of methodology too. Who are they targeting? If they're doing two parties, are they oversampling one party? And are they asking one party different questions, or are they asking them the same questions? And again, the purpose of online polls, just as I mentioned in each type, the purpose of a poll is to gather insights into your audience preferences. So let's elaborate on them once more. Number one, informed decision making. They give decision makers important information to make choices. For instance, a company can use online polls to understand customer preferences and improve its products. So basically, to help you make better decisions. Why? Because you have to understand customer preferences so you can improve your products. Engage the public. Everyone has a say. When people feel like they're being listened to, they'll be more likely to participate in decisions that affect them. Then you look at trends. We can guess what might happen by looking at what people think now. This helps governments, businesses, and others plan. Then we deal with trends, or we predict trends. So we can guess today what might happen by looking at what people think now. And I just gave you that. Those are predict trends. Again, we engage the public. We know everybody has a say. And once people believe they have a say, they're more likely to participate in decisions that affect them. Polls, they look at trends or predict trends. So what we do is look at what people are thinking now. This is going to help, again, organizations, businesses, corporations, governments, and how others plan. And also we evaluate performances. Helps us see if things are working well. For instance, if a company wants to know if customers like their new product, they can use polls to find out. And they also promote accountability. Polls can keep leaders and organizations honest. Knowing people are watching and giving feedback makes them more likely to do a good job. Overall, there you go. So what I've presented to you was different types of polls, their importance, purposes, and examples. So you must have understood by now that they are valuable tools for market research, tracking customer satisfaction, or predicting election outcomes. So by understanding their purpose and employing sound methodologies, you can use them to make informed decisions. Again, when it comes to polls can be skewed, but you have to know what's in these polls. You have to know how to conduct polls. So what I'm going to do is get into a video before I conclude this video to give you more education so you can actually see it for yourself here. So fair use, because I'm gonna get into the science beside this is the major one. The science behind the news, opinion polls, and random sampling. Fair use, fair use.
With your help, we're going to win a historic victory.
The 2012 presidential campaign is in full swing with Republican candidates.
Let me go back and look at this again as I share this. Okay, all right. Let me make it bigger. Let me make sure I have everything in here so you all can hear it. And let's start from the beginning. Fair use. Now, this is used for educational purposes only. I will be putting that information in my comments section. I just want you all to know that my channel is not monetized. So anything I use, again, is going to be to educate my audience. Fair use. Let's go.
A major winter storm walloped a bruising fight to win Tuesday's Republican most dangerous virus possible.
With your help, we're going to win a historic victory.
The 2012 presidential campaign is in full swing, with Republican candidates battling state by state to determine who will face President Barack Obama on Election Day.
In the poll numbers we are debuting tonight, there is a new GOP frontrunner in this race.
A crucial part of this grueling electoral process is polls, the almost daily snapshots of public opinion that help measure who's up and who's down among the candidates.
The aim of an opinion poll is to get a sense about a population and where they stand on some particular set of issues or policies, to measure their attitudes in effect.
Vincent Hutchings, an NSF-funded professor of political science at the University of Michigan, says that public opinion polls rely on a concept in statistics known as random sampling. The idea that it is possible to draw a clear picture about the feelings of a large group of people by examining how a small, randomly assembled slice of that group feels.
Now you see this poll right here, he said random sample. So what are they using? They're using 1,000 people. Remember, this is why polls aren't always accurate. The sample is very small. It's not representative of likely voters. I just wanted to point that out to you. Let's continue.
The process involves interviewing a very small subset of that population and doing so in a scientific manner so that you will have a better, accurate sense, but more efficient sense of what the entire population understands.
An opinion poll might focus on a particular state, such as Florida, or the entire U.S. population of more than 300 million people. Pollsters use computer programs to generate a random list of a few hundred or a few thousand telephone numbers from the larger group, and then they call each number to survey people for their opinions. Hutchings says making a random sample is a lot like cooking soup. You don't need to eat the whole pot to know if it tastes good. You just need a spoonful.
The cook merely needs to get a spoon out, taste it. That spoon represents a sample, as it were, of the actual contents of the pot.
Samples in general give better poll results when they include more characteristics of the whole population and in the same proportions as the population. Back to the soup analogy, if you're cooking chicken soup, you want your sample to include the ingredients such as chicken, noodles, and broth in the same proportions as the overall soup.
We want to make sure that the sample has the population characteristics that are demonstrated in the larger population to which we want to make an inference.
When reading a poll, it's important to also study the fine print, usually at the bottom. You'll find information there about how the poll was conducted.
Now, what you have here, as I go back, you have approximately 1,500. That's the number that's going to get you. And they're going to say within a margin of error, plus 3% or minus 3%, or plus 3% to 5%. But notice they said approximately 1,500. So something that's approximate, it could be 14.99999 or 1,500.1, or it could be 1499.9999. It could be close to fit. That's why they're getting approximate. So just remember that. Remember the sample, and remember the approximate. It's not the real number. It's an approximation. Let's continue.
And what the size of the random sample was. You will also find the margin of error, a number with a plus or minus sign in front of it. This number tells you the range of accuracy of the poll. In this case, 3 to 5 percentage points. Typically, the smaller the margin of error, the more accurate the poll is.
What that means is that the number that's reported in that survey, we have a sense that given the size of the sample and given the level of uncertainty associated with that size, the number could be 3 to 5 percentage points higher or lower, but we know it's in that range.
Even though the polls rely on just a slice of the population to gauge public opinion, they are far more accurate than you might think. Which is one reason why they play such a special role in politics.
Public opinion polls provide us with a way, absent an actual election, to discern where the public stands on various issues.
As Election Day 2012 draws closer, the science of public opinion polls will help give a clear snapshot of who might be our next president.
And of course, I wanted to give you that information. Now, that goes all the way back to 2012 or 2012, but the information that was used then is still used today. Now, again, when it comes to these polls, however, you have to understand that the polls do represent a sample. However, that sample may not always be a true sample. And when you see the margin of error, plus or minus 3%, well, what they really mean, they could go from, let's say, 100% plus 3%, it's going to give you 103%, or it's going to give you 97%. Now, basically, if it's at 100%, your poll is accurate. If it's at 97%, the poll is pretty accurate. Now, when you are over 100%, then you have to look at that poll carefully because nothing is ever perfect. And the reason why the networks pay so much attention to polls today, it's because they want to deceive the public because we live in more of a partisan era than 2012. Now, of course, I already know 2012, who was the Republican challenger to Barack Obama, was Mitt Romney. Yet Newt Gingrich started out on top, but Mitt Romney ended up being a nominee and he ended up losing to President Obama. Now, with the polls out now, just so you'll know, after this convention tomorrow, the polls are going to give Kamala Harris a slight bump. Well, again, based off of that information that I gave you, what are they going to research? Are they going to research her as a woman? Because if they research her as a woman, then how many people are going to vote for her because she's a woman? Where are they going to sample? How large is the sample going to be? Is it going to be 15? Is it going to be 3,000 where they have 1,700 women and 1,300 men? And are they going to ask each of those individuals, are they going to vote for her because she's a woman? And then how accurate is that poll? Now, I do civil engineering and we also take samples of concrete. When I take a sample, now this is where if I wanted to take a poll on concrete, when they place concrete for a floor and they place that concrete at 3,000 PSI, and I take a sample by making a cylinder sample and breaking that cylinder sample, is my result going to match what I need at 3,000 PSI? And if it does, it's representative of that floor that I placed. Now, with that example, I could be accurate. Now, with that concrete sample, well, to get the full representative sample, I may have to wait 7 days, 14 days, 28 days, or even 56 days. Because that sample that I took when I was in the field for them placing a 10,000 square foot concrete floor has got to be represented once I take that cylinder and compress it to see where it fails. Now, when it comes to polls or politics, what we have to do is we have to do tracking polls. To me, the tracking poll is the best because people do change positions, trends change. And what you're seeing now with a lot of the network polls, they're using old data. I've seen it for myself. They're making it look like Kamala Harris is doing great when she isn't. Some of the networks aren't polling, and there are reasons why they're not polling. They might not like the vice presidential candidate. Why? Because the vice presidential candidate that she picked might tank her numbers. So what they're doing to deceive everybody, and this is why you have to be an informed voter and don't worry about the polls so much. You have to know what's inside the polls. And I gave you all kinds of information because polls can be tricky. I know I used to worry about the polls, but the real poll is always that exit poll. See, to me, the polls that are accurate to me are your tracking poll, your entrance, and your exit poll. But right now, they can't use the entrance and exit poll because nobody's going to the polls yet. But they can use your tracking poll and they can use your other public opinion polls. But the bottom line is the reason why they're not accurate is because people do change. I mean, you could see the public opinion poll looking good for one candidate for 3 months, and then the other candidate comes up because it's how people articulate the issues. It's what issues are important to a certain demographic, because that's basically what you're doing with polls. You're looking at demographics. And the candidate that always wins in the polls meets the demographics ideology, or they listen to certain different demographics issues. Because a lot of these candidates, believe it or not, even when they campaign or when they debate, they might have a lot of issues that they want to talk about, but they're only going to debate what they believe are the important issues to the public. So, in the end, I want you all to take this video, look at it, get an idea on how polls work. Because the information that I utilized for this video doesn't just register with election polls, registers with marketing polls. You might need this if you want to start a business. What kind of product do you want to utilize? But in the end, how you take a poll is based on the methodology, the demographics. It could be politics, it could be a product, it could be marketing. But know how to do the poll and make that poll accurate. And also remember, sample size. A sample represents the population, but it's not the population. And always remember, polls can be skewed. But if you really want to know what's going on, always use tracking. It's the most accurate because you're getting consistent trends. That's what a poll should be used to identify. Not just the sample or the methodologies should be used to identify what's going on today, what went on yesterday, what's going to go on in the future. Bottom line, a poll is a tool used for the public, and it could be used to help a political candidate, company, it could be used for education. But in the meantime, just understand this. A poll is a tool that gives you a sample of a demographic, behavior, and opinions. And if you understand polls, how they work, particularly when you're voting during this election, it will help you become more of an informed voter, because we need smart people, not ignorance. Why? Because ignorance is a bliss. And that's my commentary for this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. If you like what I just presented, please comment, share, and subscribe. And if you are looking for some STEM content, you check out the QCIS channel. New videos every Thursday. And STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. And the name of my second channel is the QCIS channel. And on that channel, you get a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. Now, here's what happens for the 411 Talk Zone radio show. When I record all of my videos, I then post videos from the 411 Talk Zone radio show up to Twitter. Now I'm using Rumble for the 411 Talk Zone radio show. In fact, that channel is the 411 Talk Zone radio show 2 channel, the number 2. Same videos. And you can also find videos from the 411 Talk Zone radio show on my True Social page. Now, for the QCIS channel, since it is an educational channel, I post those videos up on Twitter, and I also post the QCIS channel's videos up on LinkedIn. And in the end, always be blessed for what you have. Don't worry about what you don't have. Know that the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west. You haters out there, you jealous people out there, if you think I'm talking to you, I'm not. However, if it doesn't apply, let it fly. But if the shoe fits, wear it. If you don't like the shoe, change it. And once again, thank you for listening to this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. Till next time, my name is Leon Jones. I want you to have a wonderful and gracious evening. God bless you. I'm out.